If you are hearing me from Tempe, Mesa, Glendale, Avondale, Goodyear, anywhere in the valley, stay off the freeways and stay out of hospital parking lots. I am watching camera feeds from our building, and I am patched into what is left of police, fire, and ambulance traffic, and the city center is breaking down faster than any official voice is willing to say. 10 minutes ago, I heard a crew call for help outside Valleywise, and then I heard screaming over open radio, metal banging, a woman yelling that a patient was biting through a mask, and then nothing but engine noise and one alarm tone that would not stop. If you still think this is a riot or a gas leak or one bad drug batch moving through shelters, stop thinking that. I sat in this room most of the night with headphones on and both hands on the board, and I heard enough to know something is wrong in a way that does not fit anything normal. People are attacking without warning. Bite victims are crashing fast. Some bodies are moving again after crews call them dead. I know how that sounds. I know exactly how that sounds. I did not come in here planning to say any of this. I came in to babysit transmitters, keep the overnight automation from choking, patch in the host, and make sure the tower stayed fed with clean audio until sunrise. Now the host is gone. 2 producers are gone. The newsroom is dark. The front office is locked. And I am the only man left in the booth who knows how to keep this signal up. This started for me a little after midnight when the emergency tones fired off on their own and cut across the music log. That system does not trigger itself unless somebody upstream pushes a real message or the decoder takes bad data and pukes it into the chain. I killed the automation, brought up the monitor bus, and listened to a county alert about a public safety incident near a shelter zone west of 7th Avenue. The wording was careful, too careful. It said, "Avoid the area, await instructions. Do not approach injured persons unless directed by emergency personnel." Nobody writes it that way for a normal violent call. Then the phone screener, who was still here because the overnight guy had called out sick, started waving from the hallway and holding up his headset with both hands. Every line was lit. You do not see that at 12:15 on a weekday, unless a plane hits something or the power fails. Our host took 2 callers and tried to treat it like regular overnight panic. One woman from Maryvale said a man in the bus bay had chewed through another passenger's cheek. The host dumped the call and rolled his eyes at me through the glass. Then a truck driver near Interstate 10 said traffic had stopped because a woman in a hospital gown was walking lane to lane, smashing at windshields with her elbows, and a state trooper shot her, and she got up again. The host cut him off too. Then a nursing assistant called from an emergency department and said bodies were not staying down in triage. He did not dump that one fast enough. Everybody in the room heard her crying. Everybody heard a man in the background yelling for security. Then one hard burst of screaming. Then the line went dead. Our host went from smug to pale in maybe 30 seconds. He pulled off one ear cup, asked me if any of the scanner feeds were recording, and I told him yes because I always keep a recorder rolling on the side rack during storms and bad nights. He said he was stepping out to call his wife. That was the last I saw of him. He left his phone on the counter beside a half cup of coffee and never came back through the studio door. I waited 2 minutes, then 5. Outside in the bullpen, I heard one of the back exit alarms chirp. After that, the building settled into the kind of quiet you get in office spaces after cleaning crews go home. Air handlers, server fans, a relay clicking in the engineering rack every few seconds, and the phone bank still lighting up over and over. I could have shut the lines down. I could have locked the studio, put the automation back on, and pretended the city was not coming apart. Instead, I opened the mic and said the plainest thing I could say. I told whoever was listening that I was not a reporter. I was the engineer. The regular host had stepped away, and something ugly was moving through the city. I said I was going to keep lines open and verify what I could. I said no rumors, no jokes, no pranks, no political junk, and no miracle cures. Just tell me what you see, where you see it, and whether anybody official is still on scene. The board lit up again so fast that the call screen software froze. I had to take them blind. The first hour gave me a map before the city even admitted there was a pattern. Downtown, Van Buren, The bus station area. The shelter overflow near the old service corridor west of Central. A bad scene near the light rail stop by Washington. Then calls from farther out. One from a convenience store near Camelback. One from a motel off Grand Avenue. One from a gas station by Interstate 17, where a clerk said a customer collapsed by the soda cooler, stopped breathing, then got back up with gray lips and blood all over the front of his shirt. Half the callers were terrified. The other half sounded angry because nobody believed them yet. One man from South Phoenix said he had locked his brother in a laundry room after a bite because the brother was trying to rip at his own throat and charge the front door anytime somebody got close. I asked when the bite happened. He said maybe 20 minutes before the call. He said the fever came almost right away. He said his brother quit speaking in full words, then quit acting scared, then just started trying to get at warm bodies. That part stuck with me because fear was gone in every story. Pain, too. People were not swinging and then backing off. They kept coming after broken fingers, gunshots, broken teeth, whatever you threw at them. That does not track with normal assault, normal panic, or normal drugs. Even the bad stimulants still leave moments where a man looks hurt or confused. These calls did not have that. At 1 o'clock, I pulled up our security camera grid because I wanted to see whether anybody from the station had actually made it to the parking garage. The front lobby was empty. Reception was dark. Hallway camera on the second floor showed dropped papers by the newsroom door and one desk chair flipped over. The garage camera facing the south ramp showed 3 cars leaving fast, tires chirping on concrete, and then nothing for a few minutes. Then a delivery van rolled into the entrance too hard, clipped the wall, and stopped halfway over the speed bump. The driver door opened and a man fell out on his knees. He did not look drunk. He looked sick. He was hanging onto the door, trying to stand, leaving blood on the window frame. Another man came from the passenger side, maybe trying to help, and the driver grabbed him by the neck and face and drove him into the concrete pillar so hard that his head snapped back. I watched that on a little silent black and white monitor while I had a caller on hold from Mesa describing something almost the same. The passenger got free and stumbled toward the pedestrian exit. The driver followed on bad legs, caught him at the crash bar, and went into his neck. No hesitation, no shouting, no argument, just straight into the throat. I was still staring at that when the passenger stopped fighting. A minute later, he started moving again, not crawling away, turning, getting up. I did not need anybody official after that. I knew what I was looking at, even if I had no good word for it yet. I told the audience what I saw without dressing it up. I said if a person is bitten, gets fever fast, becomes violent, drops, and then moves again, do not go hands-on. Do not rush close because you think he is seizing. Do not pin him and wait for paramedics unless paramedics are already right there with enough people to help. Secure doors. Get distance. Use heavy clothing on your arms if you have to move through somebody. Watch the mouth and hands. A man called in from Glendale and said, "You're telling people dead people are walking." I told him I was telling people I had eyes and ears, and I was done throwing away plain evidence because it sounded insane. That shut him up. Then another line came in from an apartment manager near Thomas Road, who said tenants were pounding on her office door because a woman in the courtyard had stopped breathing and then got back up after her husband covered her with a sheet. The husband tried to hug her. She tore part of his ear off. I asked if police were there. She said 2 cruisers had rolled through, lights only, then left because a crowd rushed the cars from both sides asking for help. She said she had already locked 30 people into the laundry room and was pushing dryers in front of the door. I told her to keep people away from windows and keep every sick or injured person separated. Her voice cracked when she asked, separated from what? I told her from everybody. By 2 in the morning, the scanner traffic got ugly in a more organized way. At first, it had been single calls, routine dispatch language, confused officers asking for additional units. Then, whole channels started drowning. Fire crews were not answering status checks. Ambulances were requesting law enforcement escorts and then going silent. A supervisor with Phoenix Police ordered units to stop approaching apparent medical scenes without backup. Somebody from dispatch repeated that bites to face, neck, and hands were involved in multiple calls. A firefighter, male voice, breathing hard, said his partner had been declared down inside a residence and then attacked the rescue crew when they tried to load him. He kept saying, he was down, I checked him." And then another voice took over the radio and ordered a tactical withdrawal. That is not language those guys use, unless they are fully past normal. I routed the scanner audio through a limiter so listeners could understand it without getting blasted by squelch and sirens, then started cutting in every time I heard a major road or landmark named. I repeated locations again and again: downtown hospital zones, bus terminals, shelter overflow sites, dense apartment blocks. I said the pattern out loud so people outside those areas could make decisions before official maps caught up. A woman from Scottsdale thanked me and said she had been about to drive her father into Phoenix because an urgent care had called off staff and sent patients elsewhere. I told her, stay where you are, barricade if you must, and do not bring a healthy man toward a city core where emergency systems are already overloaded. I did not know if that saved him. I still hope it did. Right before sunrise, the first public line from the state came through. It was a live patch from a government briefing room. One speaker, careful voice, saying there had been coordinated incidents involving violent individuals in several counties. The public should remain calm, travel only for essential needs, and avoid direct contact with bodily fluids from injured persons. That last part snapped every nerve in my body. Bodily fluids, not unrest, not crowd violence, not chemical exposure. Bodily fluids. The speaker would not say infected. He would not say contagious. He would not say reanimation or death. He kept calling the attackers symptomatic individuals. I cut away before the statement ended because the switchboard lit so hard I thought the phone hybrid would fry. People heard the same thing I heard. They knew the language was built to manage panic, not explain danger. One caller from Chandler said his daughter worked at Sky Harbor, and baggage crews had been ordered away from a medical hold area after a passenger came off a domestic flight convulsing, died on the floor, and got back up before airport fire reached the gate. Another caller, retired nurse from Mesa, said rapid fever, aggression, loss of pain response, and blood spread meant whatever this was had already outrun contact tracing. She sounded tired, not dramatic. She said, "You tell people this part. Anybody waiting for a clean order from above is already behind." I told them. Morning should have made things clearer. It made everything worse because daylight gave people confidence to move. Phoenix in the morning still runs on habit. Freeways fill, service trucks hit the roads, school traffic stacks up, food deliveries roll, landscapers start, bus routes turn over, and every person with a problem thinks the first answer is to get in a car. Once the sun came up, the valley tried to do that all at once. From our traffic cameras and outside calls, I watched Interstate 10 choke in both directions near the stack, watched people abandon cars when somebody started attacking in a line of traffic, watched a chain reaction on Loop 101 after a pickup drifted across lanes with a dead driver at the wheel, and watched surface streets jam around gas stations because drivers wanted fuel before leaving town. A lot of people made the same bad choice. They saw a city struggling and decided to run before more information came in. That would have made sense if the roads had stayed roads. They did not. One crash involving an infected driver or a panicked crowd could close a whole artery because nobody had the manpower to clear it. Eastbound lanes toward Mesa packed first, then north toward Anthem, then west past Tolleson. Callers kept saying the same thing. Stop traffic. Somebody pounding on a window. Somebody bleeding on the shoulder. Gunshots. Then people leaving cars and running between lanes, which blocks any emergency vehicle that still thinks it can help. I did not leave the board for most of that day. I had crackers from the vending machine, warm water from the case we kept under a desk for power outages, and one cold cup of coffee I forgot to drink until it tasted burnt and metallic. I was running the control room, screening lines with one hand, writing locations on a yellow legal pad with the other, and glancing every few minutes at the engineering monitor that showed forward power at the transmitter. That part mattered because our studio was downtown, but the signal went out from the South Mountain site through a microwave link and backup circuits. If I lost that chain, I could talk all day to nobody. Around mid-morning, the link flickered once. Just a half-second dip in modulation. I checked the remote control screen. Utility voltage at the mountain was unstable. Air conditioning load in the transmitter room was high. Outdoor temperature was rising fast. Anybody who does not work around high-power transmitters probably never thinks about heat, but the equipment cares. You lose cooling in Phoenix, you do not get hours to solve it. You get minutes before power folds back to save the finals. I started calling the site phone. No answer. Called the contract engineer who sometimes covered remote hands. No answer. Called the backup engineer who lived in Ahwatukee. Straight to voicemail. I wrote South Mountain on the pad and underlined it 3 times. That problem was coming for me whether I wanted it or not. By noon, the first curfew order came down for Central Phoenix. Too late. Way too late. It covered a zone that was already full of trapped people and half-functioning agencies. The official line said stay indoors and await instructions for controlled movement. That would have been useful 6 hours earlier. By noon, people were already on roofs waving towels, hiding in offices, cutting through alley walls between connected businesses, and begging strangers for water at intersections where lights were dead. The heat climbed past 108. That changes behavior even before infection enters the picture. Cars overheat in stalled lanes. Kids dehydrate fast. Old people trapped in apartments without working air conditioning start making bad decisions because sitting still feels worse than moving. I took a call from a guy near a mid-rise on Central who said half the tenants had broken into the management office to get master keys, and the other half were trying to push furniture against the lobby doors because someone in the package room had turned and taken 2 people before anybody understood what was happening. He wanted to know whether he should try for the roof and signal a helicopter. I told him I had not heard a single medevac or rescue helicopter working civilian pickups in the downtown core, and that the roof would trap him if the infected found stair access. I told him pick the strongest interior unit, water, tools, no contact, and watch every injured person without sentiment. He got quiet, then said, "You're saying leave bitten people out." I said I was saying do not kill healthy people to comfort one dying person. I hated that sentence. It was still true. The second night is where doubt died in the city. First night still had room for excuses. Drugs, panic, coordinated attacks, some contaminant no one had identified yet. By the second night, too many people had seen it with their own eyes. You would hear it in how callers talked. No more asking if this was real. No more arguing over whether a body could move after death. People called to ask for practical answers. How do you bind a bite without going hands-on? Do doors need screws, or will furniture hold? Does boiling water help if blood got on a counter? Will a chain link fence slow them? Can somebody turn if blood gets in the eyes without a bite? I answered only what I could defend. Heavy barriers are better than light ones. Avoid blood, saliva, any wet contact from an infected person. Face shields beat bravery. If you have bleach, soap, hot water, use them for surfaces, not miracles. Firearms work if you know what you are doing, and if you can afford the noise and the attention. Head trauma stops movement better than body shots from every account I had heard. Slow ones can be managed with distance. Fresh turns are worse because they still move with speed and coordination for a while. That was another pattern. A person who had just turned could sprint, grab, climb, or slam into a door with enough force to split cheap wood. Later on, after more damage and more time, some slowed down. The dead were not all equal. That mattered. I got my first clean confirmation from inside the building around 10 that night. One of the security contractors had stayed on site. I did not even know he was still there until I saw him on the third-floor camera, moving with a flashlight and a baton. He was checking doors, probably looking for other employees, maybe looking for an exit route. He crossed the newsroom, went past the sales cubicles, and stopped outside the conference room. He leaned down, out of frame, then jumped back so hard he hit the wall. A woman launched up from behind the reception desk where she had been lying flat. She got both hands on his vest and bit the side of his jaw under the strapline. He drove the flashlight into her face over and over. She never let go until he slammed her head into the corner of the desk. He staggered off camera, one hand on his neck, and made it to the stairwell door before falling. I called the floor intercom even though I knew it was useless. I watched him bleed and shake on the landing camera. He was dead in minutes. He was back on his feet in less than 10. He came up the stairs with his head hanging wrong and both hands scraping the wall. He hit the locked studio corridor door until the glass cracked. After that, I dragged a copy machine, 2 equipment racks, and a steel file cabinet in front of the booth entrance. I kept talking the whole time because I had no reason to go quiet, and every reason to let listeners hear that I was still there. Somewhere in the middle of that night, the city stopped sounding like a city. Traffic noise dropped. Aircraft noise dropped. Sirens were still there but scattered, broken, often far away, and many ended mid-run. Gunfire increased. Not constant movie gunfire, single shots, short, ugly bursts. Then silence. Then dogs barking from whole blocks at once. Then one long spell where I could hear nothing outside our own building but the roof units and, every so often, something heavy hitting the corridor door down the hall. I started using our shortwave receiver more because local systems were dying by the hour. Shortwave gave me fragments from outside the valley. Tucson was struggling near hospitals and migrant holding areas. Yuma had roadblocks and a prison incident. Somebody in New Mexico reported National Guard medics getting rushed during a field screening. A freight rail worker somewhere west of Bakersfield said crews had cut locomotives loose and sealed themselves inside a service building. A man in Nevada, exhausted voice, said Las Vegas hotels were stacking bodies in loading docks because elevators kept trapping infected guests between floors and maintenance crews would not go back in. I did not know how much of that was solid. Enough of it matched local patterns that I kept relaying the bigger points. Dense population, medical choke points, transport hubs, shelters, jails, and traffic jams were all turning into feeders. Infection was not the only killer. Crowds, heat, bad rumors, and desperate movement were doing their own damage. The whole country was tripping over itself in the same direction. On the third morning, the transmitter started folding back for real. Forward power dropped in steps, not all at once. That told me the protection circuits were doing their job and trying to save the hardware from heat or unstable input. I switched to the backup processor. No change. Switched audio paths. No change. The problem was not studio side anymore. It was the mountain, or the link to it. I pulled up the remote telemetry. Room temperature at the site was climbing. Generator status was on. Utility feed looked dead. Fuel level was lower than it should have been. That site normally had enough diesel for a decent outage, but only if the air conditioning and blower loads were cycling normally, and only if no one had siphoned anything. I called every number I had for the site owner, tower management, and contracted maintenance. Nobody picked up. One text came back from a field tech I knew. He said roads up South Mountain were blocked near one access gate. City crews had pulled back, and he was sheltering with family in Levine. He added one line that made the decision for me. He wrote, "If room temp hits shutoff, you lose the city." He was right. I could stay in the booth and die safe with a dead signal, or I could go outside and try to keep one useful thing alive. I spent 20 minutes getting ready and talked through every step on air because listeners deserved to know what was happening if I vanished. I found the station pickup in the garage. Old white truck, quarter tank, toolbox in the back, no glamour at all. I scavenged 2 5-gallon diesel cans from maintenance, a hand pump, spare belts, basic hand tools, a battery work light, duct tape, insulated gloves, one old sidearm from the owner's locked office with 2 magazines of 9mm, and 3 cases of bottled water. I did not carry the gun because I thought I was turning into some hardened road warrior. I carried it because I had watched a dead security guard stand back up inside my own workplace, and there was no one left to call. I used a remote unit we normally kept for live remotes and fed my mic through a cellular data pack while I still had service. Patchy signal was better than silence. Before I left, I opened all the internal studio mics, killed the gate, and let ambient room noise ride under my voice so people could tell the broadcast was live. Then I unlocked the corridor barricade and moved it one piece at a time. The thing pounding on the far door had gone quiet. I did not take comfort from that. Quiet in those days usually meant movement, not peace. Getting out of downtown Phoenix on the 3rd day took maybe 40 minutes and felt longer than the whole first night. Streets that should have been full were half empty in the wrong way. Cars sat with doors open. One city bus was stopped sideways across a turn lane on Jefferson, with the hazard lights still blinking, and dark blood dried down the stepwell. Near an office garage on Washington, I saw 3 men dragging vending machines across a glass entrance, while another man on the sidewalk hammered a crowbar against the doors from outside. He was covered in blood from chest to waist, and kept smashing at the glass, even after his forearm bent the wrong direction. That was useful information. Broken arm, no stop. Head hits matter, body damage often does not. I said that on air and hated how flat my own voice sounded. At a gas station near 7th Street, there were maybe 20 people around the pumps. Some filling cans, some fighting, some just staring. The clerk was dead behind the counter with the drawer open. Nobody had even bothered to close the door. A little farther south, I passed a church parking lot being used as a water handout point. Volunteers had a decent line going, real orderly, cases stacked by the curb. Then, one old man near the front of the line bent over and threw up dark blood on a woman's shoes. She screamed, he lunged, and the whole line burst apart in 3 directions. I kept driving. There was nothing one more man with a microphone could do in a scene already lost. The freeways were traps by then, so I stayed on surface streets and cut south toward the mountain. Phoenix looks wide and manageable when you drive it on a normal afternoon. During that week, the same wide roads worked against people. Too much exposure, too much heat, too many long signals dead at once. Too many medians and walls forcing cars into bad funnels. Near baseline, I saw my first military vehicles, 4 National Guard trucks and 2 Humvees at an intersection with concertina wire and a hard checkpoint built around abandoned civilian cars. The soldiers were waving healthy traffic away from the city core, not escorting people in. One sergeant put a palm up when I rolled to the barricade. He looked exhausted, sunburned, and already past the point where he expected to control much. I held my engineer badge to the window and shouted that the South Mountain transmitter site was failing and I needed access. He asked if the station was still broadcasting. I told him yes, barely. He looked at another soldier, then back at me and said, "Keep telling them not to move at dusk." That was his priority. Not hospitals, not evacuation routes. Dusk. I asked why. He said bites were worse at night because people took chances to move, and the fresh turns blended in until they got close. He yanked one side of the wire aside just enough for the truck. I drove through, and he slapped the bed twice with an open hand, the old move people use when speed matters more than ceremony. The road into South Mountain Park was eerie for a reason I did not catch until later. Parks normally have joggers, cyclists, family cars, people parked at overlooks, rangers, somebody. I saw almost none of that. A few abandoned vehicles, one burned sedan near a turnoff, one dead coyote on the shoulder, and heat coming off the pavement hard enough to shimmer. The towers ahead were steady, red and white structures cutting into the haze, and every one of them meant signal, television, public safety, Somebody's still trying to speak to somebody. I kept the mic live and talked through what I knew about the site. Shared tower compounds. Generators. Air-conditioned transmitter rooms. Microwave dishes aimed back toward studios. Remote telemetry that tells you enough to worry and never enough to relax. I said it because I needed my own thoughts in order. Also because I wanted listeners to understand that this was not a magic voice in the sky. It was buildings, fans, fuel, copper, steel, and a tired man in work boots trying not to screw up one of the last useful systems in range. When I reached the gate, it was half open and hanging crooked. Somebody had rammed it earlier, maybe trying to loot diesel, maybe trying to shelter. Inside the compound, one equipment shed door stood wide open. A generator was running, coughing every few seconds under load. That sound made me move faster than any scream had all week. The transmitter room smelled hot before I even reached the threshold. Not burning yet. Hot dust, ozone, and cooked insulation from air moving through equipment that wanted more cooling than it was getting. One of the wall units was dead. The other was running flat out and losing. The remote readout had not lied. Room temperature was climbing toward automatic shutdown. Forward power was already down by almost half. Fuel gauge on the generator was lower than it should have been because the side panel had been pried open and one cap lay on the concrete. Somebody had siphoned from it. Not all of it, but enough. I topped it off from the cans, bled the line, checked oil, checked coolant, then pulled the cover on the dead wall unit. Bad contactor and a fried fan motor. No miracle fix sitting in a drawer. I killed power, cleaned the contact points enough to get one ugly temporary pull-in, gave the fan shaft a shove by hand, and after 3 ugly starts it caught. Loud, rough, but spinning. Cold air started pushing again. I watched room temperature stall, then start to drop, 1 degree at a time. Best sight I had seen in 3 days. The next problem hit right away. The microwave link from the studio had gone unstable. Probably dish alignment from heat shift, maybe line damage. Maybe the downtown roof took debris. Audio was dropping in and out. I switched the transmitter to backup input and fed it from the remote box I had carried up. My own voice came back through the off-air monitor, thin but solid. I laughed once, out of relief more than humor, then leaned into the rack mic and told the audience the city still had a voice. I planned to stabilize the site and head back downtown. That plan died before I finished the next sentence. Through the compound fence, I saw movement on the access road. Not a crowd. 4 people, then 7, then more behind them between the brush and the road shoulder. Some were living, 1 or 2 trying to wave. Others were wrong in the way I had learned to spot by then. Too direct, too committed. Arms set forward, head down, no scanning, no hesitation. One woman in hospital scrubs was mixed into the group with blood from collar to waist and 1 shoe missing. A man who looked healthy was trying to drag an older woman uphill by both wrists. He saw me in the doorway and yelled for help. The sound brought the others faster. I had chain link, 1 good gate, a half-broken outer gate, and a compound full of diesel and hot electronics. If that fence fell and the generator got knocked out, the signal died anyway. I grabbed the handheld mic and started giving instructions in the plainest terms I had. Healthy people to the left side of the gate. Anybody bitten or sick, stay back. Anybody who could not obey was not coming inside. That caused a bad few seconds because fear makes people lie. The man dragging the older woman kept yelling she was just tired. Then she lunged for his arm and bit deep into his wrist while he was still holding her. That answered the question for everybody. The healthy ones backed off on their own. The infected hit the fence. I put 2 rounds into the first one through the mesh, and neither mattered until I took the head. After that, I conserved ammunition and used a steel digging bar from the utility shed through the chain link whenever I could reach clean. It was ugly work. It was still work that kept the gate standing. That evening, from the mountain, I had the first real view of what the valley had become. Smoke columns in more than one direction. Not one giant fire, a dozen smaller ones. Vehicle fires, building fires, trash fires where somebody lost control of an improvised burn pile. Sections of the city still had power. Others were patchy or dark. Interstate ribbons that should have been moving were mostly frozen, just rows of metal catching sunset. I stayed on air and used the higher vantage to relay what I could honestly see. Central corridors clogged. Southbound movement lighter than north in a few sectors. Heavy smoke west. A flare near Sky Harbor service area. A dark patch spreading through parts of downtown that suggested another substation trip. I was careful not to start people stampeding toward whatever looked open, because wide open routes never stayed open long. Instead, I started talking about local survival in place. Water first. Interior rooms. Controlled noise. Rotating watches. Clean tools. No hero runs after dark. The guard sergeant's warning sat in my head. Dusk got people killed because the fresh ones still moved hard, and normal folks believed twilight gave cover. It gave cover to both sides. The infected did not care about poor visibility. People did. That gap mattered. I repeated the warning over and over. If you must move, dawn only. If you have a sick person in the house, do not wait for sunrise if he is already turning violent. Act before dark if you can. Do not transport a feverish bite victim in your family car with kids in the back. That sounds cruel, only until you imagine the car stopped at one red light with nowhere to open a door. On the fourth day, I settled into a new routine without really choosing it. Check generator. Check air conditioning. Check fuel. Check fence line. Check off-air monitor. Check the remote box. Answer calls until the cellular data pack dropped. Switched to patched scanner, shortwave, and a hardline I managed to pull through an old maintenance demarc inside the site office. The city was not getting better. It was sorting itself. Pockets of order were forming where people had water, walls, tools, and leadership. Pockets of chaos were also hardening where apartments were too full, where stores had become rumor magnets, or where infected movement had built up around food lines and aid drops. Callers from Chandler and Gilbert reported neighborhoods doing patrol rotations with golf carts and battery radios. A nurse trapped with 7 others in a rehab office in Mesa described using door hinge pins and extension cords to secure a glass corridor because the dead kept noticing motion through the side lights. A mechanic in Glendale said his shop crew had converted a roll-up bay into a sally port for supply runs, so they could strip off outer clothing and wash before entering the main floor. That was smart. I repeated it. There were also bad ideas spreading. People setting whole apartment units on fire because one resident turned inside. People throwing bitten relatives into pools and assuming water solved something. Men driving around with spotlights and rifles, treating moving bodies and living strangers as the same target. Disorder was learning too. What changed that day was the federal voice. Up to then, every official statement had been thin, late, and carefully hedged. On the fourth day, the language got darker. Interstate closures were confirmed in several sectors. Cross-state travel was discouraged unless you had a secure destination. National Guard coordination was active in multiple metropolitan areas. Critical care capacity had been exceeded in several regions. Temporary casualty holding sites were being established away from main hospitals. Nobody said zombie. Nobody said dead. Nobody said reanimated remains. The state still talked about aggressive infected persons. But the advice started matching the truth at last. Avoid direct contact with blood and saliva. Do not attempt home care for rapidly deteriorating bite victims. Secure the dead until specialized teams can respond. Specialized teams. There were no specialized teams in most places by then. There were tired deputies, burned-out medics, armed neighbors, and a few guarded checkpoints. The words had finally caught up, but the manpower had not. After that statement, my lines filled with a different kind of call. Not disbelief, permission. People wanted to hear another human being say that the old rules were gone. A son asked whether he had the right to put down his turned father before the father broke through a bedroom door. I could not answer that for his soul. I answered for the living. I told him if the father was gone, the door would not save anyone for long, and delay only buys more victims. There was a long silence. Then he said thank you in a voice I still remember. The fifth day brought the heat wave on top of everything else. Phoenix does not need help to kill careless people in summer. Add power loss, fear, water panic, and infected movement, and the city starts doing damage by simple physics. I spent much of that day repeating heat advice, because too many callers were treating infection as the only threat. If you are sheltering in a dark apartment with no air conditioning, close off unused rooms, block sun, move low, ration activity, and watch old people and children for confusion. Do not burn energy in midday unless the structure is already compromised. Store water in every clean container, bathtubs if the line still works, trash cans lined with clean bags if that is what you have. One woman in Ahwatukee called just to say her husband wanted to drive for bottled water because stores were already stripped. I told her check the water heater first, toilet tank if clean, ice if any remains, canned fruit liquid, every pipe trap in the place before you risk a run in full sun through jammed roads. Another man from West Phoenix said a group in his cul-de-sac had started knocking on doors demanding everyone contribute fuel to one shared generator. Good idea in theory. Bad idea when backed by rifles and panic. I told him shared resources only work if rules are agreed before tempers break, and if sick people are screened before crowding around common points. He laughed once and said screening was over because one of the men collecting gas had a bandaged hand nobody trusted. That is how a block goes from cooperation to blood in one afternoon. Late that day I made the worst supply run of the week. Fuel on the mountain was dropping again, and the road below the access gate had enough movement that I knew more people had learned where the towers were. A transmitter site is a target once desperate people realize it has power, shade, sometimes water, and fenced ground. I had to bring up more diesel before someone else took the chance away. I drove down in the heat, hit a municipal yard I knew from previous engineering work because we had once borrowed a transfer pump during a storm outage and found it half abandoned. 2 maintenance trucks gone, 1 warehouse open, 1 dead man in a fluorescent vest curled by the office door with the back of his skull blown out. Human work, not infection. Inside the yard there were drums, tools, busted pallets, and 3 infected moving slow in the shade under a lean-to. Slow ones are dangerous in a different way. Fresh ones rush. These old movers drift and wait until you put yourself in reach. I use distance, noise control, and patience. One by one, no heroics. Pump, cans, extra hose, a box of nitrile gloves, and a carton of chemical toilet packets went in the truck. That last item sounds small. It was not. Waste control matters fast when systems break. I said that on air all the way back up the hill because somebody out there needed permission to think about ordinary filth while the dead were moving. Ordinary filth still kills. That night I started hearing from people beyond Arizona with more consistency. A ham operator outside Albuquerque had a stable setup and relayed traffic for isolated homes. A volunteer fire chief in West Texas got on long enough to say one nursing home incident had taken half his available manpower and forced roadblocks around 2 square miles of town. Somebody north of Sacramento reported orchard workers refusing bunkhouse quarantine after one man rose from a heat shed and tore into a supervisor. A woman in rural Oklahoma said her church had turned into a safe room for 30 people until one of the deacons let in a bitten cousin after dark, and the whole place went bad inside 15 minutes. The pattern was national now, maybe more. I stopped thinking in city terms and started thinking in system terms. Medical collapse first, transport collapse second, food access third, water stress fourth, trust collapse over all of it. You can survive infected movement with walls and discipline. Trust collapse is worse because it enters every decision. Do I let this neighbor in? Do I tell anyone I still have insulin? Do I share that I have a working truck? Do I admit my sister was scratched? That stuff tears communities apart before the first gate even fails. I said that on air in plain language. Keep your word if you want a group to hold. Do not hide bites. Do not hide fever. Do not steal from the common water and then expect someone to stand watch for your kids at dawn. The dead were dangerous. Lying, living people were building half the graveyard, too. On the 6th day, the mountain got company. Not infected at first. Survivors. 3 of them came up on foot just after sunrise, waving a white shirt tied to a broom handle. A retired city bus mechanic from South Phoenix, a warehouse woman from Tempe, and a 19-year-old kid from Levine who had followed the mechanic after losing contact with his family. They were cooked by the climb and looked 1 bad hour away from dropping. I nearly turned them away because every extra person is another risk around a site that exists to feed signal, not shelter strangers. Then the mechanic said something that changed my math. He said he knew large diesel engines and transfer switches. I let them through under hard rules. Hands wash first. Bite check in full light. No hidden injuries. No argument about quarantine. The woman had a cut on her forearm from glass, clean and not a bite. The kid had heat rash and shaking hands. The mechanic looked solid enough to stand a watch after water and shade. I set them in the spare room and kept the inner racks locked. By noon, the mechanic had already spotted a fuel seep I missed on one of the lines. Good man to have. The woman turned out to be better on radios than either of us and started logging outside reports with exact road names and times. The kid slept 14 hours, woke up, and then helped me carry fencing material to reinforce the gate. I did not ask for a backstory from any of them. Nobody had bandwidth left for confessions. Work was enough. Having 3 more people changed the broadcast too. Not in tone. I kept that plain and direct. It changed reach. The woman from Tempe started sorting incoming information into what was first-hand, what was second-hand but repeated, and what smelled wrong. That alone made us more useful than half the official feeds still running. The mechanic built a better antenna lash-up for our backup receiver and got us cleaner local air traffic and utility chatter. The kid, after sleep and water, proved good at detail work and sat beside me marking a paper map with colored pens. Green for passable routes reported twice, yellow for uncertain, red for dead zones, active infected concentrations, or armed theft groups. We never told listeners a route was safe. We told them what had been seen and when. That matters. Safe is a lie in a moving collapse. Fresh information is not. By then, most calls were no longer asking whether the dead were real. They wanted route advice to dialysis, insulin, a trapped parent, a water source, or a family member stuck on the wrong side of the valley. Some calls tore at me. A father in Mesa wanted to reach his son in Glendale. A woman near Deer Valley had a baby formula issue and no transport. A group in a school kitchen near Avondale had food and walls but no antibiotics after a slash wound turned bad. We could not rescue people. We could only move information. I started saying it often because I did not want listeners mistaking a voice for an army. All we had was a signal, a map, 4 tired bodies, and enough honesty to stay useful. That evening brought the first real attack on the site from living men. Not starving people asking for water. Organized thieves. Pickup truck, 2 motorcycles, 5 men I could count, maybe more in the brush. They rolled up near sunset and stopped outside shouting that they needed fuel and a radio. I told them I could give water but not entry. They laughed and shot the chain on the damaged outer gate. That was the end of talking. From the rack room, I killed exterior lights except one flood facing downhill and left the rest dark. The mechanic cut the generator shed side lamp too, so the whole compound became harder to read from outside. The woman from Tempe stayed on air, reading road reports in a steady voice, while I took the handheld and gave listeners a quick warning that the site was under threat. The men came through the outer gate fast, thinking darkness helped them. They did not know the ground or the inner fence layout. One hit loose gravel and went down hard. Another ran straight into the shadow of the utility trailer where the kid and I had strung steel wire at shin height. Gunfire started after that, bad and sloppy. Pistol rounds and at least one shotgun. They were aiming at shapes, not targets. We answered only when a head or chest was clear, and only to break momentum. Then infected came in from the road, because gunfire solves one problem by opening 3 more. The thieves tried to pull back, saw the infected on the approach, and panicked. 2 went down outside the fence. 1 got dragged under a bike. 1 made it to the truck, bleeding from the neck. They left the dead, the bikes, and half a box of shells. I got back on the mic shaking hard enough that my teeth clicked, and I told the audience one thing for certain. Noise attracts everything. The dead, the desperate, the stupid, all of it. After that, the 6th night turned into a strange kind of calm. No peace. Just the dull understanding that we had crossed another line, and there was no version of normal waiting around the corner. We stripped the thieves' truck for fuel after confirming none of the bodies were moving. We pushed 1 motorcycle into the shed for parts. We burned blood off the approach with diesel and a controlled torch because we had already learned dried gore by a gate brings insects, smell, and fresh attention. The woman stayed on air most of that night while I slept in 20-minute scraps on the floor by the racks. Her delivery was clean and unsentimental, perfect for the job. If you are north of the canal road near this cross street, do not use the underpass. Stalled vehicles and infected present at last report. If you are sheltering without cooling, begin moving only before sunrise. If a fever starts after a bite, isolate immediately. No drama, just useful words. The mechanic checked all locks twice and then sat with a wrench across his knees by the office door. The kid finally cried once, quietly, in the dark where he thought no one could hear. He got it out, washed his face, and went right back to coiling cables. That was how people survived that week. Not by speeches, by doing the next physical thing in front of them. The 7th morning opened with dust in the light, and a sky so ordinary it made me angry. Clear blue, hard sun, the kind of morning that should belong to commuters, landscapers, school drop-off, old men walking dogs before the heat, coffee runs, roofers cussing at nail guns. Instead, I had a city map covered in marks and a legal pad full of names I never learned the endings to. Some callers had gone silent after one report. Some had checked in daily from the same barricaded address and then stopped. A few kept going and became little anchors for everyone else. A pharmacy tech in Gilbert helping distribute insulin from a locked clinic. 2 brothers in Glendale running water from a neighborhood pool pump through improvised filters and then boiling it for a block of trapped seniors. A welder in West Phoenix teaching listeners how to lag bolt plywood over outward opening doors without stepping into a hallway. A deputy somewhere east of Apache Junction calling once a day to say which wash crossings were still passable. That became the shape of the world. Not institutions first, cells of competence, small, honest groups, lone people with tools, voices that did not waste time lying. I said it on air around noon on that 7th day. If you are waiting for the old machine to come back this week, stop waiting. Build a smaller machine where you are. Water plan. Waste plan. Watch plan. Entry rules. Medical rules. Quiet hours. Signals with neighbors you trust. The country may recover. Your block will not survive long enough to see that if your block never gets serious. We had enough signal stability by then to think ahead, and thinking ahead felt strange after 6 days of pure reaction. The downtown studio was probably gone to us. Even if the building still stood, the corridor breach, the dead inside, and the city around it made a recovery run stupid. So I made the choice on air where anyone could hear it. We were not going back. We were turning the South Mountain site into a working emergency voice until fuel, equipment, or fate ended the run. The mechanic nodded before I even finished. The woman had already started reorganizing the office into shifts, logs, and supply bins. The kid grinned for the first time all week when I said we could use the old production mic mounted in a case for backup if the main patch failed. We spent the afternoon doing ordinary setup under extraordinary conditions. Cleaning a table, labeling cables, checking batteries, moving water into shade, setting one room for quarantine, no matter how much we prayed never to use it, writing plain language rules and taping them to the inside wall. No hidden symptoms, no open gate without 2 armed watchers, no fires inside the compound except controlled utility work, no wasting airtime with fantasies, facts, instructions, locations, timestamps. That was our little constitution. Not elegant, good enough. Towards sunset on the 7th day, I got one more call that pinned the whole week in place for me. A man from an apartment near Indian School and 24th Street came on weak signal and said he had been listening since the first night. He said there were 12 people left on his floor, 3 apartments knocked together, 1 nurse, 1 plumber, 1 retired Marine, 2 kids, and an older woman who knew everybody's medicine by sight. He said they had nearly made a run downtown on day 1 because officials kept saying more help was coming. Then they heard my voice say the roads were choking and the hospitals were failing. They stayed put. They had lost people anyway, but they were still alive. He did not call for advice. He called to report that their building had water for now, that 2 neighboring floors had gone silent, and that they were starting a roof signal panel at dawn using white sheets and black spray paint so any friendly eyes could read occupancy and medical needs from a distance. He said, "I wanted somebody to know we got organized." That hit me harder than any scream from the first nights. Because that was the point. Not that I had stayed on air, not that one transmitter kept humming on a mountain. The point was that somewhere out there, ordinary people had heard enough truth soon enough to stop acting helpless and start acting like a unit. So this is where I am at the end of the first week. On a mountain above Phoenix in a transmitter compound that smells of diesel, hot metal, bleach, sweat, and dust. I have one engineer's chair pulled up to a folding table, a paper map under my left hand, an off-air monitor humming to my right, and 3 other good people moving around this room without wasting words. The city below is not dead. It is fractured. Some neighborhoods are holding, some are gone. Some are lying to themselves and will pay for it tonight. The dead are real. Infection through bites and wet contact is real. Rapid fever and violent turn are real. Heat, thirst, panic, theft, and bad leadership are real too. And in many places, those are doing almost as much killing. If you are listening and you still have walls, water, and 1 other steady person, you have more than plenty of callers had by day 3. Use it. Get strict. Get clean. Get boring. Boring is survival now. Fancy plans die on roads. Loud men die at gates. People who think love can outrun infection die in bedrooms with the door half open. Lock it down and think small. Think 1 room, 1 night, 1 dawn supply run, 1 honest count of who is hurt and who is not. I am going to keep talking after this. Road updates when we have them. Water points when they are confirmed twice. Utility failures when we can verify them. Shortwave traffic from outside the state. Practical fixes from listeners who know real trades and real medicine. No rumors, no speeches, no polished lies. Just the job. If you can hear me in Phoenix, in Tempe, in Mesa, in Glendale, in Chandler, in Avondale, in Scottsdale, in any place this signal still reaches, understand one thing before night comes down again. The first week is over. Nobody gets to call this confusion anymore. This is the world now, at least for a while. The dead came back. The systems cracked. The roads betrayed people. The heat finished what fear started. And still, some of us are here. Still talking. Still counting. Still telling the truth into a mic on a mountain over a city that has not decided whether it is going to die or learn how to live smaller. If you are one of the people still breathing behind a locked door, stay there through dark unless fire or breach forces your hand. Fill what containers you can. Put tools by the entry. Pick who stands first watch. Then listen close. We are still on the air.